What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So ever since Game Boy and Game Boy Advance were added to the mix, there's been a lot of excitement for Nintendo Switch Online, and now some discoveries are being made that could be pointing towards some big-time titles, as well as a certain feature that could be heading to the service, and we'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about a couple of sales charts with the NPD, as well as the UK showing some disappointments, as well as some pretty big opening weeks. And we'll also be going over a game that's been in the making for nearly 9 years now, delayed over and over and over again, nearly Duke Nukem Forever status, but has not only gone gold, it's actually coming out a week early. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps that a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're going to start today with SEGA and the PSVR 2. A little while ago, there was a game that was kind of being teased, and we sort of figured it was going to be a title from the Dreamcast that maybe would be reimagined for the PSVR 2, and it appears that is what's happened. There was an entire video kind of doing the announcement for it, but we can see this posted up over on Push Square. Dreamcast Cosmic Smash, as a classic, is being reborn on PSVR 2. They have the teaser announcement trailer here, and this is sort of like racquetball, I guess, is how I would describe it. You can see some little bit of the gameplay here where it looks like you're kind of playing Breakout with a racket, and you have a ball you're hitting back and forth. Obviously would work in perfect for PSVR 2. It is coming out later on this year globally. We don't have an exact release date for it yet. And sure, these kind of games make a lot of sense for PSVR 2, and it's a game that otherwise has just kind of been left on the Dreamcast and in arcades, and the more games you can get for the PSVR 2, the better. So it's just another one to check out again later on this year. Also, while there's been a lot of praise and excitement around Metroid Prime Remastered, with good reason, because this is an awesome title to play on the Switch, there was a disappointing aspect here to the entire project, which you can see this pointed out over on Twitter from Zoid, saying, while many studios did amazing work on the remaster, I'm let down. Metroid Prime's remaster did not include the full original game credits. I worked with so many amazing people in the game, and everyone's name should be included in the remaster, not just a single card like this, which you can see it just says, based on the work of Metroid Prime original Nintendo, GameCube, and Wii versions development staff. It seems strange because I have seen a lot of people pointing out their names being missing from credits of games in the last year. It's been very prevalent on Twitter at times when a big release comes out that someone was left out of the credits. This one seems kind of egregious because there's a lot of people to leave out. I believe it'd be up to the publisher to decide who is credited, but it seems pretty straightforward to just have the names of the original developers for Metroid Prime from the GameCube and even the Wii, and just kind of add it in there on the back end with the credit roll as you get to the current studio and staff that worked on it. So another thing is, if they patch it in, it'll never be part of the original game that you would assume would ship on the cartridge. So a disappointing situation all the way around with Nintendo. Oh, and if you were curious how the development of Psychonauts 2 was, well, there is a massive documentary that just dropped on YouTube. And when I say massive, I'm not kidding. It's like over 30 parts, 22 hours of footage, just kind of showcasing the start to finish, some of the issues they went through and all of this. They also talked about 2 projects that had to kind of get put on hold so they could go all hands on deck and work on Psychonauts 2. So you do wonder if Double Fine maybe is going back to those projects, or maybe have completely shelved them and moved on to something else. But yeah, interesting to see this show up. And if you're curious about game development or Double Fine or just Psychonauts 2, which is an awesome title that released a couple of years ago, make sure you give this one a look. There's an entire playlist. It'll just take you a while to get through it. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Nintendo Switch Online, Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, and the hope for some features that may include the Nintendo 64. There's a lot to go over here, and I've been talking about this for a while because it's been rumored for a while, but I do have reason to believe that this will become a thing, I would say within the next year or so, although the Nintendo Switch Online schedule is all over the place for releases, so who really knows about the timeline? But there was something that was noticed here, and you can see this posted over on Famaboards, and it quickly started to make the rounds. As you can see, Orbit says, noticed on this new Nintendo Switch Online video from Nintendo of Japan, they got rid of the Pokemon cannot be transferred to these games disclaimer in the Pokemon Stadium section. could just be hopium. This, of course, referring to the idea of the transfer pack being used between the Nintendo 64 Pokemon Stadium and maybe a Game Boy Pokemon game like Blue or Red or Yellow, anything like that, used obviously as we did back in the day, where we would have Pokemon from our Game Boy cartridges be transferred and seen for the first time ever in full Nintendo 64 3D glory. It was a big deal back then to be able to do that. You could also play your Game Boy game through the transfer pack on the TV, although we were already doing that back with the Super Game Boy on the Super Nintendo. Now, all of this is kind of predicated on the idea that Nintendo and the Pokemon Company would bring the Pokemon games to Nintendo Switch Online, as we see Pokemon Stadium already on its way to the Nintendo 64 section of NSO. Will we actually see Pokemon games show up on Game Boy or Game Boy Advance? Well, for most of us as the consumer, it makes a ton of sense to have that there because it'd be great, right? You could have all these different Pokemon games. You can think of red, blue, yellow. They can get weird and even throw green on there if they want. Although I assume in Japan, they'll get green, right? Like normal you'd expect there. But then you go up to gold, silver, you'd have crystal. Then you go up to Game Boy Advance, sapphire, ruby. Maybe they do fire red, leaf green. Like I said, the possibilities here are endless. My only question is, would it make sense in their mind to do that when they know full well they can show up with Pokemon Red and Blue on the eShop for $20 a piece and probably sell millions right away? And while I do think that's something that maybe the more traditional Nintendo would do, it actually kind of benefits them to continue selling more and more Nintendo Switch Online subscriptions, as there is the need for continued growth, and to show that with the subscription service being a massive revenue stream for them as it continues to climb into the 50, 60, 70 million. So it's very possible Nintendo can push it that far, even with just the Switch alone, whether it's because it's $20 a year. And to be honest, some people just sign up and forget about it, similar to what happens with Netflix or HBO Max or any of these other streaming services. But if they have compelling software and a large library, then Nintendo may also look around and say, the price is going up. All the Pokemon games are on there. Guess what? Now it's $70 or $80 a year. And you might say, wow, that sounds obscene. But we're also paying some $120 to Sony per year for their PlayStation Plus Premium. Microsoft is locked in at, $180 a year? And I mentioned this with Nintendo's overall retail sales and the price they had at MSRP. They're going to look around and say, well, no, Zelda's worth as much as Returnal and Ratchet and Clank, as this is definitely $70. They may get to a position where they have quite the library on their hands for NSO and think, well, it's worth as much as what Sony has for premium, what Microsoft has with Game Pass, even though Game Pass has the day one drops from Microsoft. And to be fair, Sony with PlayStation Plus Premium and Extra have current gen games on there. Now, there is one other aspect to all of this to tie it together, and that has to do with Game Boy games being able to talk to each other that are different. And it sounds weird, but you can see this from Luigi Blood posted up as they were looking through some of the code for these emulators, which people have been ripping into these and even playing games that are not necessarily part of that NSO library, and they're getting some fantastic results out of these emulators. I mean, very impressive stuff here that Nintendo did with NSO. But it says, by the way, if you wonder about if Nintendo would support Game Boy or Game Boy Advance Game Link with technically different games, just know that every game in the app with Link support does keep track of games that are compatible with it. So they would essentially have to add it in, and then you could have different games communicate with each other, which would be key and essentially required for the Pokemon games. Red and Blue, well, it wouldn't make a lot of sense, although I guess you have to trade certain Pokemon so they evolve. The idea to catch all Pokemon and fill up your Pokedex is you have to talk with a Red or a Blue and, just trade different Pokemon you can't get otherwise back and forth. But I do believe transfer pack support is coming, which tells me that Pokemon games will show up in some fashion. How many? Which ones? That's the part I'm really unsure of, but hey, Pokemon Day is coming up here soon, and that to me would be the most logical place coming up anyway, where they can make that announcement. So we'll see if anything is there. Next up, let's talk about the NPD sales charts. These track sales for gaming in the US, and this would be covering January. I believe it runs up to January 28th. And we'll start with the games, which we can see this over on Twitter from Matt Piscatella. These are the top 20 titles, starting with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Not a shock at all that Call of Duty just continues to dominate the NPD charts in the US. Then we have Dead Space Remake. Look at that, number 2. That is awesome. I would like to see Dead Space do really, really well, because I would like to see them not only continue to remake these titles going into Dead Space 2, but Maybe Dead Space 4? Well, there's a possibility. We have Madden NFL 23, FIFA 23, Fire Emblem Engage at number 5. By the way, this is Fire Emblem Engage, just physical copies. No digital sales are included here. So that is actually really impressive for Fire Emblem Engage, just the physical copies. Interesting stuff. I'm curious where it would place, if it would move up a couple of spots, maybe just under Dead Space, if the digital copies were included. But from there, we have Elden Ring. Then Forspoken, that's at number 7. This would include physical and digital. That feels like a low debut for Square, who is notorious for having some very high expectations for their titles. This also being built on Luminous, I'm sure costing them quite a bit of money. We'll see how it does over time, because this would have been like 4 or 5 days tracked in the NPD, so maybe it still hangs out in the top 10 in February, and then it's like, okay, it's accumulating sales, but definitely not the, I'd say, debut they were looking for. Then we have God of War Ragnarok, One Piece Odyssey, that making a top 10, and then Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, again, just the physical copies rounding out the top 10. I do want to point out a pretty big absence here in the top 20, though, and that is Hi-Fi Rush. Now, it would have had 3 days to track on the NPDs. Some people were wondering if the Steam sales were included. They are, as well as Xbox, so it didn't chart at all in the top 20. And the NPD does track by revenue, Hi-Fi Rush being a $30 game, as well as being accessible on Game Pass, which means you're just downloading it. You're not technically buying it, adding into their revenue pool. You could look to that to explain it, but it is kind of a shame to not see it placed at all, because it's a genuinely interesting, unique, and fun title overall. But if Microsoft is getting the engagement they want through Game Pass, then they're probably fine with the overall revenue that was generated from it. As for the consoles, the PlayStation 5 was the #1 selling system for January, dollars and units, then the Switch, and then the Xbox, which it's been a lot of talk, especially even from Microsoft with investors, that the Xbox is kind of tracking downwards, which is odd for this time of a console's generation and life. But again, as we start to really get into 2023, I believe we're going to see Microsoft pick up here a bit with some of their titles upcoming, which does include Redfall, Forza, and of course, Starfield. Who knows, maybe they have another surprise for us towards the end of the year with Hellblade 2. But as of now, it looks like we're just kind of waiting for some of these titles to show up for the Xbox, see what kind of effect it has not only on Game Pass subscriptions, but also console sales. But overall, pretty good, I would say, for Dead Space and certainly for Fire Emblem Engage. And we'll see if Forspoken lives up to the lofty expectations that I'm sure Square Enix has behind the scenes. Next up, let's talk about a game that has been 9 years almost in the making. I believe its original trailer debuted in 2014, and that is Dead Island 2, the sequel to what was an interesting, very janky, I'd say, zombie action RPG. It was certainly a bit different at the time, but still, it was certainly, I'd say, a cult classic for a lot of people. And finally seeing Dead Island 2 actually come out and seems like it was on track is good news. It did get delayed, but it appears now it's going to be coming out, which, again, it sounds weird to say that out loud. Dead Island 2 is actually releasing. Take a look at this, posted up over on Twitter. You asked for it, you got it. Dead Island 2 went gold, and it's coming out a week early. Okay, this is strange because, as I mentioned, it's been delayed multiple times. It's bounced around between developers and publishing houses, and not only is it coming out, it's gone gold, they've moved it up a week, now coming out April 21st. So it was pushed to April 28th, now coming out a week early, April 21st. And I think the reason for that is kind of obvious. When Jedi Survivor got pushed to April 28th, and I saw that, and I was like, that's really the same day as Dead Island 2, because Jedi Survivor is one of my most anticipated titles for all of 2023. I really liked Jedi Fallen Order, and it coming out on the day of Dead Island 2, which I have to check out just for the principle of it, because Dead Island 2 is actually releasing. Didn't think I'd ever see that happen. So it was going to be a very hectic day. At least now I get a week to spend with Dead Island 2 and then go into Jedi Survivor. So it makes a lot of sense from their end to go that route, and it's exciting stuff. I'm curious to see how this one will turn out based on some of the gameplay footage they've shown off. It looks like it's, Dead Island again, but we'll see if they take advantage of some of the newer mechanics and things that have kind of evolved over time. since even the game was originally released back in 2014. But exciting stuff. We'll get it a week early now, that being April 21st. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about the UK sales charts. Now, I will admit the UK sales charts, as we've gone over it more and more, it does appear that the physical sales in the UK have continued to kind of decline over time, but it still gives us an indication on kind of the trend, and it does seem to carry over to other regions as well. Just a early indication as to how certain games are doing right out of the gate, and that does include Hogwarts Legacy. So let's take a look here at the top 10, starting with number 1, as you'd expect. Yes, it is Hogwarts Legacy. Then God of War Ragnarok, FIFA 23, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Dead Space, Nintendo Switch Sports, Minecraft on the Switch, and then New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. Interesting to see that jump all the way up to the 10th spot from number 18. But here's where things get really interesting, specifically for Hogwarts Legacy. We know a big time release was Elden Ring, right? That was like the big fantasy release, as games industry describes here, for last year. Well, Hogwarts Legacy first week sales are up 80% over Elden Ring. It almost doubled Elden Ring's debut week. That is pretty impressive stuff. 82% of the Hogwarts Legacy sales were on PS5, 18% on the Xbox Series S and X. Not too surprising, one, because of the marketing that Sony has picked up for Hogwarts Legacy, and two, because the Xbox Series seems to trend more towards digital sales overall, with the Xbox Series S being extremely popular. So that would make sense for that kind of split at retail. Now, this is especially impressive because Hogwarts Legacy doesn't have a PS4 or an Xbox One version right now, and it doesn't have the Switch version. Those will be coming later on. So it seems like Hogwarts Legacy out to a massive start, even just at retail for current gen systems. And the fact that it will see releases on systems that, yes, will be older when it comes out, but it'll still have a large install base to try to get some extra copies from, and then eventually going to the Switch. And I gotta say, the more I play this game, the more I'm curious about that Switch version. It would be the most impressive Switch port ever if it works within reason. And when I say within reason, after what I'm seeing here, 25 to 30 frames and it not looking like Vaseline was smeared all over the screen, I'll consider that a win for the Switch. But yeah, impressive numbers here. Again, I expect WB to eventually release some sort of statement going over the sales. I kind of feel like they're waiting for that 10 million mark and then they'll put it out there. But I guess we'll wait and see on that end. But so far, yeah, Hogwarts Legacy off to a huge start. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday. We're asked, which Game Boy or Game Boy Advance Pokemon generation was your favorite? Look at that, 43% said Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Oh, okay, interesting. 31% said Gold, Silver, Crystal, and then 27% Red, Blue, Yellow. See, for me, I think it's Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Red, Blue, and Yellow, while it was awesome, those kind of snuck up on really everyone in the US, and once they came out and Pokemon hit the States, it was this big phenomenon that just exploded overnight. The buildup to Gold and Silver was incredible. It was such a fun time online. This is like the early days of forums and message boards and all this, and people were trying to relay information and translate stuff as they were able to find it. And then the ROMs leaked online and people were data mining and pulling screenshots, and there was one translated ROM that got out there that was like 5% translated, and people were trying to go through it and had no idea what was happening, and then it came out and there was Red Gyarados. It was really, really fun. And then you beat it and it's like, oh yeah, you can go through all Kanto as well. It's just mind blown. So for me, there's a lot of nostalgia for Red and Blue, but man, Gold, Silver, and Crystal, those were the good days. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Buddha says, I feel one thing that could really help Sony would be adding VR titles to one of their tier lists of PS Plus. No one in the virtual reality space is doing something like that, and it could separate them from the Game Pass comparisons. The headset is expensive, yes, but look at it in the amount of games you get with it being a PlayStation Plus member. So I do think there's a possibility Sony could try something like that. I felt it would have been a great idea to do like a PlayStation Plus collections like they did for people who bought a PS5 as early adopters. They gave you, 20 games or whatnot. It's going away, yes, but it was to kind of fill in that cross-gen gap and get you on board and playing games right away with your PS5 and get you to sign up to PlayStation Plus. I think it'd be a good idea to have something like that for PSVR 2. Pick 20 games from the PSVR library that you work to make backwards compatible, right? And just say, here you go, you bought this really expensive headset. When you plug it in and you register it, then you have access to these games that you would need to have that headset anyway to play. Just different ways to get people using or interested in PSVR 2, because it is going to be an uphill battle for them in general, just in VR, but then also a device that's more expensive than the console you bought. And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today, whereas the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance with Nintendo Switch Online and N64 compatibility. Do you think it's something Nintendo would pursue, and how would they go about putting Pokemon games on those different tiers? And then also, Elden Ring did well last year, but then here comes Hogwarts Legacy, nearly doubling up the sales. What kind of numbers do you think this game's gonna do by the end of the year? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.